Hi, everyone. My name is Grant Sewell. I'm the head of security here at Ahead, and I'm joined today by Michael Pyle, who's one of our principal advisors in our network and security solutions areas. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most popular buzzwords in technology, zero trust. It can sound a little intimidating for a lot of organizations, and frankly, it overlaps with a lot of other buzzwords that you probably hear all the time, like CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker, and the newest one, SASE, for Secure Access Service Edge. It's been translated into a lot of different products and architectures. Google made this famous early on with Beyond Corp, and NIST actually created zero trust principles for companies to follow. In fact, some analysts actually believe that this is going to be a $60 billion market just in zero trust by 2028. So let's jump right into it. Michael, from your view in the industry, what percentage of companies that you're working with actually take a zero trust approach to their network and security edge?
Not many of my customers that I'm working with. I know that overall, Ahead is working with a lot of customers to define a zero trust strategy. Our security practice has a lot of material and work that they do with customers around that. What I mostly hear, it comes from two different perspectives. Like we have companies that I'm working with that are in the process of building the framework, the foundations, with zero trust in a goal, right? They know they want to get there. They know they have to get there at some point. But it's the journey to get there. So, but I think others kind of see it as snake oil. Like I've had people, customers kind of make that comment to me. It's just another product or a solution. You mentioned it, right? You said it. It's expected to be a $60 billion industry. So that means there's a lot of people out there throwing zero trust into a name of a product, and with this idea that this is the miracle, it's going to solve all of their security problems. And I think I think that's kind of scaring some of our customers off.
Yeah, I can see that. At its core, I think zero trust is really about one thing, and that's the problem is we've created a buzzword, but really what it is identity-based security. While some regulated industries and organizations they might have a robust IAM program, but I see a lot of companies that are still struggling in that space, and remote work makes it even more difficult where really this is a core control we need, and it's the most important control I would argue is identity when we don't actually interact with people face to face on a day-to-day basis anymore.
Yeah, for sure. We've got a lot of companies. Some companies that I'm working with now on projects that are asking for help to develop identity access management programs, right? Um, but one of the things that we also end up talking about sometimes is, is around the asset management piece of it. As we start to try and build that matrix of, who is trying to access what, it starts to become a question of, well, what is that what? Can you guys tell us what those assets are? So, really it comes down to how do you manage something unless you know that you own it, that you have it, that it's part of your your environment. And that applies to a lot of stuff like security, it applies, patch management, vulnerabilities, but it also feeds into your operations management, your service management, even monitoring.
But isn't that? I mean, for me though, I disagree. Like I think that that's the benefit of zero trust is I don't need to care about the assets anymore. And the reality is that a CMDB in most organizations is I think the average is like between 55 and 60% accurate. Which you don't already have a good CMDB and it's not maintained because nobody ever wants to do that. It's just the reality of that tool. I don't think that matters anymore with zero trust. The benefit is I can focus on your identity and I don't care about what device you're using, and the reality is that you can connect, and I'm going to look at your risk based on your location, based on your activity, based on what you're doing. Like that's for me. I don't think that CMDB relates back, or asset management in general is that important when it relates to this.
Well, I think it's important to define what an identity is, right? It's not just a user account. What about the endpoint? It's just as much in some cases of the identity as the user account is. And some of that's easier than others. If you have a corporate owned device, you can put a device certificate on it and say, okay, super easy. Like, oh yeah, I can trust this device. But as we
Always easy.
talk about, it's always easy. But when you start talking about the remote work and you start talking about the multitude of devices, like you said, we don't care where that device is, and that's true to a certain degree. But the endpoint isn't just what you're working from; it's what you're talking to. So understanding what an endpoint or is and what makes up an identity. It's an identity is more than just user account. It's more than just an endpoint. It's where are you? What OS is it running? Patch levels, so and so on. But it also feeds into the idea around regulations. We've got a customer that we're working with right now, a large global customer, and they want to build a identity access management strategy. And a big part of the conversation is what do we do in these areas that are really regulated, like U.S. versus China, right? How do you manage your identity when you have these global regulations, that are so much different than the U.S. And I think that's part of the challenge as well. And so knowing what you have, where you have it, is a really important part of that conversation.
I can see that. I think you bring a good point that we've still got to know what those, whether you call them, we always like to say crown jewels, right? But what applications, what services, what systems, knowing that asset and that configuration and how it works is still going to be a really important piece of zero trust. And the reality is that from a we the perimeter doesn't exist anymore. The castle and moat strategy isn't going to work, and so with zero trust, we're trying to pull those controls back to the endpoint, which is great because really visibility becomes our key goal, as it should be from an IT perspective, whether that's from a user experience and understanding how things are working, but also looking at, what are users accessing, like especially shadow IT services, which have skyrocketed now that we have a more remote workforce because people just want to use whatever they can to be most productive. And user productivity and happiness is super important in companies today.
Yeah, I mean that's true. And I get it, right? I mean, CMDB is not a high priority for a lot of customers. I mean, it does come up quite a bit. Um, y- you know, uh, we have a lot of companies that acknowledge that it's important, but because it's not a project, it's not a one and done, because it's a journey, because the act of maintaining a CMDB is it's a workload, right? It's a I think that I think that people are a little scared to start with it, and I think it's important to note that the CMDB nirvana, if you will, isn't necessary to start the zero trust journey, right? Come back to your point. I think identifying those crown jewels, those critical business apps processes in a company, is a good start. And I think what I've seen in the past is people just starting with let's replace VPN but treat zero trust like a VPN. But a lot of times we see them start that process or that journey because they have some group or business process that they need to put better controls around, and then use the zero trust to gain that visibility.
Well, and that's is a good point, and that is, again, the benefit of zero trust is one, creating better user experience, which I think a lot of people don't understand or sell that as well. And then with a name like zero trust, doesn't exactly sound like the most friendly thing that we want to implement. But it's an area that companies are struggling with, especially VPN. I think that's a good point that companies are struggling with new remote work models. It is if hairpinning traffic going back to a data center isn't the model anymore. It's a bad user experience. And as we look at that, those core controls, whether that's your VPN or even basic things like vulnerability management, endpoint security, identity, you mentioned those earlier, anything that gives us visibility, we need to be reevaluating those controls, because the reality is our business models have changed. And whether that means you're hybrid or in office or remote, most companies have some sort of hybrid model at this point, and some of those controls just may not be the best technical solutions anymore. So you either need to tweak them, or you need to be adjusting procedural controls or replacing products to better manage your risk.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like, look, let's call the dog ugly, right? I mean, VPN is over 20 years old. Legally it can drink. So, but it was an easy button solution for remote access with an environment where everything had perimeter-based security, and VPN was probably a less frequently used technology. It was probably mostly used by IT and things like that within a company. And obviously COVID has had a huge impact on how everybody's working, but it's
Yeah.
not just IT. It's also, like you mentioned, it's about moving to the cloud. We have so much more in the cloud. I mean, Microsoft Office is the easy one to point out. like you said, hairpinning, and and having remote workers, like having a remote worker on the East Coast, but your office or your data center is on the West Coast, and hairpinning all that traffic back. Like you said, it's going to be a horrible user experience. So all those complexities, I think, really are pushing people towards, we got to look at something different than VPN. I mean, yeah, you can do split tunnel, right? But that can, that may or may not be the right way to do it either. And so that's what, we see that, like I mentioned before, we see people starting the process of just saying, okay, we'll just wholesale get rid of VPN and look at zero trust, and then put ourselves in a position where we can get better visibility, and start to lock that down. And they're doing that in some ways. They're really focusing on maturing their identity provider. Are they doing SSO and MFA, and companies like Okta can make it very easy for you to say, okay, I'm coming from a known device, or I'm coming from a different region, or look at those types of things and say, okay, if you're coming from in the office, I'm not going to make you do MFA, but if you're coming from somewhere new or unusual or whatever, then I'm going to force MFA. Starting to put some of those controls on the user account, and putting a little bit of smarts about the identity into it.
Yeah. So then I think that's a really good point, is that doing what you can still have that progressive approach to this. Really, I think where we've come down to is in summary, I think we both agree that identity is the core to zero trust, but really, you're right. The identity can be a person or an asset, or even an application at this point. So we need to ensure that asset management, along with other foundational security and technology controls, are really that remains the core success factor to have a good zero trust implementation. But trust is really, I think that's the better part of zero trust. When people are looking at this, we say trust. That's what we should be trying to achieve with our users, with our customers, whoever that may be. That becomes a new word. It's about trusting the activity, the user, the asset. So, Michael, thanks for joining me today and having this nice little friendly
Thanks, man.
debate. It's always good to learn a little bit, and revisit the 20-year-old VPN, which was awesome too. So. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and we hope that this helped shed some light on zero trust. Have a great day.